Well, I appreciate the speaker. I appreciate having the time. I heard my colleague on the other side of the aisle and certainly appreciate his friendship and service. I would take some disagreement with my celebrating the extent to which the President of the United States has announced beforehand the race and sex of the next Supreme Court justice. And I would remind my friend, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle in general, the extent to which the current president rejected, filibustered, blocked Janice Rogers Brown, notably both black and female. He did so because she wasn't the right kind of black and female. See? She was not a conservative. I'm sorry. She was a conservative. She was not a leftist, a liberal. So the current president blocked when he was in the United States Senate, filibustered, fought, broke the rules and the traditions of the Senate to do it, by the way. Janice Rogers Brown, a black, female, qualified, but conservative judge. So he refused to let her advance. Why? Now, the President of the United States is going out and lauding, praising his predetermination that the next justice must be black or female. I would note also that the president blocked, attacked, voted against, and did so, we know, for one reason. He was a conservative. Now, how do we know that? Yes, indeed, a memo in black and white, senators and staffers, back in 2003. I happen to know this because I was a lawyer on the Senate Judiciary Committee. But my, how this town loves to sweep aside, like the current Democrat President of the United States, working with Democrat when he was a senator to stop, to block, to filibuster Miguel Estrada because he is an Hispanic conservative. And we can't have that, can we? Because it breaks the narrative. It destroys the narrative. Republicans are anti-Hispanic. Republicans are anti-black. We can't have a black conservative woman advance under a Republican President George W. Bush. We can't have an Hispanic Miguel Estrada advance under a Republican George W. Bush. But no. Will you hear Jen Psaki talking about that at the podium at the White House? Or were you Hillary? Lies about the whipping of migrants at our border? Will you hear that no report has been generated by the Department of Justice or the Department of Homeland Security or anybody else about the alleged whipping of migrants, which did not occur, which we know didn't occur? By fact, we know it didn't occur. But yet the President of the United States and his own White House secretary sat at the podium and accused them being our Border Patrol agents, standing on the front lines, being ignored, underfunded, chastised, refused to say any apology since that day. They have refused to look at the Border Patrol agents and say, we're sorry, we got that wrong. No report forthcoming. Anybody sensing a theme that my Democrat friends and colleagues in the White House on the other side of the aisle race an issue, love to make race an issue, but they're going to sweep aside the killing of Miguel Estrada's nomination because he's an Hispanic male, Hispanic conservative. Sweep aside the blocking of Janice Rogers Brown. Sweep aside running to cry racism and whipping on the Rio Grande when it is the policies of the Secretary of Homeland Security that is specifically and intentionally endangering the American people, causing our young children across this country to die from poisonings and overdoses, causing bullets to be fired upon our law enforcement officers in Texas, ranches to get overrun, livestock to get out, cartels to get empowered. Homeland Security literally refuses to enforce any of the laws to stop that from happening. But oh no, and Jen Psaki can't bring herself, and the president can't bring himself to look in the eyes of the Border Patrol and apologize for saying that they were whipping human beings. That's the state of the Democrat Party's commitment to race. It's all a fraud. It's all a fiction. It's all a front. It's all about continuing to foment racial division for partisan political gain. And it has nothing to do about judging people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. Because if it were, Janice Rogers Brown would not have been blocked. Miguel Estrada would not have been blocked. And the President of the United States wouldn't be standing up at a lectern today predetermining the race and the sex of the next Justice of the United States Supreme Court. I came down here today to talk about our law enforcement community. A year and a half ago, I sat here on the floor of the House, maybe in the same spot, with the number 43 similarly positioned on a board. And that 43 represented the number of law enforcement, police officers killed in the line of duty at that time. Well, I would say to the Speaker, to my colleagues who are, of course, notably, as I like to observe, not here. This is our idea of debate, in the United States House of Representatives. Fly out day, everybody's getting home. Nobody's here. We never have actual debate. We never offer amendments. We never have a back and forth. We come down and have show votes and give speeches then on the Capitol steps about how Republicans are better than Democrats or Democrats are better than Republicans. We never sit down here and actually debate. If we did, then we could have an honest debate about policies that will protect this country and protect law enforcement officers from the constant barrage and attack levied against them across this country. I am sick and tired of seeing nonstop attacks on our law enforcement community for being the ones on the front lines every day dealing with crime and figuring out how to protect our communities, and yet getting tossed under the bus, cast aside as being the ones that we should be targeting. 84 dead law enforcement officers across this country last year. 84. 346 officers were shot in the line of duty. 103 ambush-style attacks on law enforcement officers, up 115% from the year before. 4 police officers were beaten to death. 3 were stabbed to death. Sergeant Joshua Bartlett, Lubbock County Sheriff's Office in Texas, shot and killed during a barricade at a home on July 15th of last year. Earlier in the morning, the subject had been stopped by a Texas Highway Patrol trooper for reckless driving, attempted to bait the officer into a confrontation, returned home after the encounter, began walking around the neighborhood with a firearm at 1:15. When officers with the Levelland Police Department arrived, the man opened fire, barricaded himself inside. The regional SWAT team was requested as the man randomly fired shots from the home. Sergeant Bartlett was a United States Army veteran, and he is survived by his wife, 4 sons, parents, and a brother. Police officer Mitchell Aaron Penton, Dallas, Texas, struck and killed by a vehicle operated by an intoxicated driver February 13th, 2021. At the time of his death, he had a stepson and his wife was expecting. Police officer Brandon M. Stalker, Toledo Police Department, Ohio, shot and killed during a barricade involving an arson suspect. Officer Stalker was on a perimeter position, was struck in the head and fatally wounded. He is survived by his 2 children and fiance. Police officer Jimmy N., shot and killed while responding to a domestic violence call on May 11th, 2021. He had served with the Stockton Police Department for 6 years. He is survived by his wife, 7-month-old son, and 2 stepchildren. Sergeant James Smith, Iowa State Patrol, Iowa, shot and killed while attempting to arrest a subject who had assaulted and disarmed another law enforcement officer during a traffic stop on April 2nd, 2021. He is survived by his wife, 2 children, mother, brother, and sister. Lieutenant Michael Boot, shot and killed after responding to a call involving a subject attempting suicide. United States Air Force veteran, and served with the Hancock County Sheriff's Office for 8 years. He's survived by his wife and 2 children. Police officer Chris Oberheim, Champaign Police Department, Illinois, shot and killed at about 3:20 a.m. while responding to a domestic disturbance call. He had been on the job 20 years, 44, with a wife and 4 children. Trooper Chad Michael Walker, Texas Department of Public Safety, March 28, 2021. Succumbed to gunshot wounds sustained 5 days earlier when he was ambushed while stopping to assist what he believed was a disabled vehicle near Mejia, Texas. He had served with the Texas Highway Patrol for 6 years, 18 years of law enforcement. He is survived by his wife, 15-year-old son, twin 7-year-old daughters, and a 2-month-old daughter. Here are some of the quotes from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and at the other end of Pennsylvania Avenue about police officers. Jen Psaki, White House press secretary, while criticizing Fox News coverage of soft on crime policies, stated while laughing, "What does that even mean?" and referred to the coverage as an alternative universe. President Biden famously expressed support for the defund the police movement during an interview in 2020, then had to walk that back after backlash. Vice President Kamala Harris applauded Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti for defunding the police. Representative Ocasio-Cortez said, quote, "Defunding police means defunding police," arguing the cuts to the New York Police Department weren't enough. Representative Ayanna Pressley said she supports efforts to defund police departments. Representative Rashida Tlaib called for, quote, "no more police." Tlaib's campaign has paid over $150,000 to defund the police activist Rasha Mubarak. Representative Ilhan Omar said, quote, "not only do we need to defund, we need to dismantle police departments." Representative Cori Bush said that she would, quote, "make sure," end quote, "she has private security for protection," while simultaneously promising to defund the police. This weekend, Representative Bush doubled down on her support for defunding our police departments on Twitter. Representative Biden's Assistant Attorney General, Kristen Clark, supported efforts to defund the police. Representative President Biden's Associate Attorney General, Vanita Gupta said officials must heed calls to, quote, decrease police budgets and the scope, role, and responsibility of police in our lives. President Biden's Secretary of Labor, Marty Walsh, proposed a budget to divert funding from law enforcement. Now, we see what's happening in Minnesota, where you have one of the individuals who was a part of the mob violence riots in the summer of 2020, who burned down a store, a commercial property, and did so with video footage indicating the glee of doing so, this being an individual with a very long criminal record. The man who owned or worked at the establishment, I think had 5 kids, died as a result of the fire set by this individual in Minnesota. The United States Attorney's Office in Minnesota filed a sentencing brief that read exactly like the defense lawyer's brief, citing all of the events of the summer, completely offsetting the dead father of 5 with a store burned to the ground during mob violence rule in the summer of 2020. And this United States Department of Justice, this United States Attorney's Office in Minnesota, downward departed from the sentencing guidelines of 20 years down to 10 years, purposely citing the political interests of the summer of 2020, the political cause of the summer of 2020, in recommending that downward departure, despite the criminal record of the perpetrator of the crime, despite the destroyed and burned down building, despite the death of the owner of the store and the fact that he had multiple children. All of that was cast aside in the political judgment, not even of the judge, but of the United States Attorney's Office. Lo and behold, that acting United States attorney, a few months later, is now working at Maine Justice. Sure like to know why. Sure like to know who was involved. Sure like to know who made the calls. Sure like to know from the current acting United States attorney if that acting United States attorney agrees with the sentencing recommendations of the so-called prosecutors in the Minnesota U.S. Attorney's Office who turned a blind eye to their duty to keep the streets safe, to prosecute them under their oath to the Constitution and defense of the laws of the United States, to protect the people of Minnesota, and chose to choose a political path and chose to follow politics rather than do their job. We want to know. We're going to ask questions in the House Judiciary Committee, and I can assure you that if the good people of the United States were to give the majority to the Republicans in January of 2023, there are going to be some questions asked and some answers delivered by this administration for their failure to enforce the laws of the United States while American people die, lose property, are harmed, are killed. At the border of Texas or in Minnesota, it doesn't matter. The laws of the United States are supposed to be enforced, and we should be standing up for the rule of law. And we're going to demand answers to questions. I want answers from the United States Attorney General for targeting parents for daring to stand up to school boards. I want answers from the Secretary of Homeland Security for his clearly impeachable conduct, for recklessly ignoring the laws of the United States, endangering my people and constituents in Texas, endangering the people of this country, while empowering cartels and allowing fentanyl to pour into our schools. I want answers. We're going to demand answers. We're going to want answers and demand answers from Anthony Fauci and all the bureaucrats at NIH and CDC for shutting down our schools, shutting down our economy, lying about what we were seeing in terms of gain-of-function research in China. We're going to want answers. And we're going to get those answers. While this body fiddles, we will demand answers if the American people will give us the ability to get them. Now, I've mentioned our situation at our border. We are in the midst of a fentanyl, opioid, and drug crisis in this country, the likes we have not seen before. Those of us who grew up in the 80s and know what we saw with the cocaine epidemic. I was a 14-year-old when Len Bias notoriously died from an overdose within a week of being drafted by the Boston Celtics after his career at the University of Maryland. We know the horrors of the cocaine epidemic that led, by the way, to the crime bills of the 1990s, supported by this president, supported by black Americans across this country, lobbied for by black pastors and black leaders across this country because of the violence and the epidemic of drugs across our cities and across our towns in the 1980s and 1990s. And we responded. And as a result, the crime rates went down. And now what are we seeing? Massive spikes in crime, massive spikes in drug use. Carjackings in our nation's capital, where it is easier to get carjacked than to order a hamburger while we're under lockdown and vax mandates and vax passports in the nation's capital. Side note, yet another reason why we should never let the District of Columbia be a state. It's not supposed to have the political interests of a state. It is supposed to be our national capital where people can come and go, where they can petition their government, where they can come do the business of the people. So we'll address that issue as well in the next Congress. I'm proud to represent Texas, but Texas is under assault. Texas is under assault every day by cartel-driven violence, fueled by China, driven by the profit motive of pouring fentanyl into our communities, destroying our children's lives, causing addiction, causing death, causing destruction. And this administration not only does nothing, it's worse than that. This administration purposefully ignores the laws of the United States to the detriment and the endangerment of the American people. There is no other way to put it. When our laws require operational control of the border and we do not have it. There's no other way to put it. When our ranches are overrun, fences are cut, livestock gets out. There's no other way to put it when there are stash houses in Houston, in San Antonio, in Laredo, in Del Rio, in McAllen, in Arizona, in California, in every big city across this country. Stash houses where human beings are being moved for profit. There's no other way to put it when the current administration is releasing people into the United States, knowingly, in violation of law, releasing people into the United States under the guise of so-called asylum. They know it's not asylum. They know it's not credible fear. They know they're releasing single adult males. They're lying about it because we see them talking about the lies on tape. And the American people are the ones holding the bag. The American people are the ones who have their kids dying because they take a Xanax that's laced with fentanyl. And this administration doesn't care. This administration ignores the rule of law, ignores the Secure Fence Act, lets fencing rust in the field, fails to require the fence to continue to be constructed, which would help support Border Patrol and the communities in South Texas. But let me send a very clear warning signal to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. You take for granted, or my colleagues take for granted, the people of South Texas as a political matter. And I can tell you the people of South Texas are tired of it. The people of South Texas are tired of being on the front lines of a cartel-driven drug and human trafficking war with bullets flying, people dying, morgues filled, rape trees being used. And this body, the People's House, not only sits silent, they facilitate it. And they facilitate a Department of Justice and a Department of Homeland Security who does nothing but fuel the crisis even more. 100,306 dead Americans as a result of drug overdoses or poisoning. Mr. Speaker, how many minutes do I have left?
The gentleman has 4 minutes remaining.
I appreciate the Speaker. 100,306 dead Americans as a result of poisonings and overdoses. Mr. Speaker, may I ask, is there time left for my gentleman, or is that 4 minutes left in my total time?
It's 4 minutes left in your total time, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to close and I'm going to yield to my friend who I promised some time. I apologize to the gentleman that time is now a little constrained. But I do want to finish by saying it is our duty to secure the border of the United States. It is the duty of this secretary to secure the border of the United States. 100,000 dead Americans as a result of wide open borders, and it is impeachable conduct by the Secretary of Homeland Security. And we're going to address that issue if the American people give us the ability to be in the majority. And I would yield my remaining time, which I believe is